right, so welcome to your personalized deep dive, opening week matchups in the Wrench Turning Trainwrecks Fantasy Baseball League. Tomorrow's opening day.
Yeah.
It is finally here, and, you shared the projections for 5 head-to-head battles that we're going to look at today and really kind of, unpack these matchups, see, where each team is strong, where they might be a little vulnerable, and ultimately give you a clearer picture of, what to expect here in week 1.
Absolutely.
We'll be digging into the, projected offensive and pitching breakdowns for each of these games and, trying to identify areas where one team might really dominate or maybe where it looks like it'll be a really close, back and forth battle and really pinpointing, those aha moments within these projections. So Wrench Turning Trainwrecks, 10-team, head-to-head, 5x5 category league scoring.
Standard.
Yep. So we're talking runs, home runs, RBIs, steals, batting average on the hitting side.
Yes.
Wins, saves, strikeouts, ERA, WAP on the pitching side. So we're going to be jumping into all 10 of those categories for each one of these matchups.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's just jump right in here. Game number 1, Kankakee Cremators versus Go Birds. And right off the bat, this one strikes me as a potential, contrast in styles, like how these teams are built.
Yeah, it does. When you just glance at the projections, Go Birds really stand out as having the advantage in overall offensive firepower just because of their depth. It just looks like they can apply a lot of pressure to the Cremators, who seem to be leaning a little bit more on, top-end, really impactful players, especially on the pitching staff.
Yeah. Well, let's break down that hitting matchup first then.
Okay.
What is kind of driving, those projections?
Well, if we look at home runs, RBIs, those counting stats, Go Birds has a pretty significant advantage, and it seems to be directly related to just having a deeper lineup with multiple players who can contribute across all those categories. So, think about guys like Kyle Tucker, Francisco Lindor, both projected to chip in everywhere. Then you've got, some exciting young speedsters in Wyatt Langford, James Wood, Pete Crow Armstrong helping rack up those runs and steals, even Matt McLean. He's really coming into his own there. And then when you consider the potential for bench contributions from, Jerks, Profar, Jackson Holiday, those extra plate appearances can really make a difference over the course of a week. It really looks like Go Birds has a real volume advantage in terms of overall offensive production.
So like a death by 1,000 cuts sort of.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's a strategy. Get guys on base, move them over, drive them in just a constant, sort of wave of offense.
Yeah. So what can the Kankakee Cremators bring offensively to, counteract that?
They definitely have some star power at the top of that lineup. Ellie De La Cruz has that rare combination of elite speed and power. Julio Rodriguez, just a dynamic player, can impact the game in so many ways. And Kyle Schwarber, we know he can change a game with one swing. And they've got Victor Scott II on the bench, who could be a really interesting source of steals and maybe a sneaky good batting average. But, the projections seem to suggest that they are a little bit more reliant on those top-tier guys to produce those counting stats, whereas Go Birds really has that more balanced attack across the lineup. Now, it's interesting, though, when we look at batting average, it's actually incredibly close, projected around .292 for the Cravenets and .293 for the Go Birds, which, indicates that both teams have hitters who are expected to, make quality contact consistently. So while Go Birds might score more runs, hit more homers overall, those top hitters for the Cremators are still expected to hit for average at, a really comparable clip.
So the hitting takeaway seems to be Go Birds' depth and their potential to just accumulate those counting stats, especially stolen bases, versus the Cremators' reliance on, their big bats to really carry that load.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if those big bats can keep pace with that sheer volume from the Go Birds.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's look at pitching now. And this is where, often in these head-to-head matchups, you can see teams make up some ground.
Absolutely.
So, can Kankakee slow down this, Go Birds offense?
Well, they might be able to. Go Birds is projected to have a slight edge in overall strikeouts, and they've got a more noticeable advantage in projected saves with Andres Munoz and Tanner Scott kind of, anchoring that back into the bullpen. And then you've got some, potential closers on the bench, and Pete Fairbanks and even Kenley Jansen could factor in there. But Kankakee is projected to have a slim advantage in ERA, and that's probably being driven by Blake Snell, at the top of their rotation, just a track record of elite run prevention. And they also have a, potentially dominant relief duo in Mason Miller and Felix Bautista. Now, it's worth noting that the save projection for Bautista, might be a little optimistic coming off of Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
It can take some time for a pitcher to really regain that consistency and solidify their role, early in the season. But strikeout potential there is undeniable.
So it's almost a trade-off. Go Birds with the strikeout and save advantage. Kankakee looking better in ERA. What about pitching volume, though? Who's expected to throw more innings?
That's a good question and a crucial part of the equation. When you factor in the bench arms for Kankakee guys like Walker Buehler, Jeffrey Springs, Drew Rasmussen, even Justin Verlander, they really help to close that overall pitching volume gap. So while their top projected starters might not have the highest innings projections individually, that depth really helps them to, accumulate more innings pitched as a staff, and that translates into more opportunities for wins and strikeouts.
Right.
And it brings those categories, much closer to even. And it's also interesting to note that they are projected to be virtually identical in WHIP, which, just as a reminder, walks plus hits per inning pitched. So it indicates that both teams are expected to be, similarly effective at preventing runners from getting on base. So while Go Birds has that projected edge in saves Yankees, slightly better ERA, and now this, more comparable pitching volume, thanks to their depth, really makes this a very intriguing pitching matchup.
All right, so overall then for this matchup, Kankakee Cremators versus Go Birds, what's your read on how this one might shake out?
Well, based on these projections, it looks like Go Birds has a slightly, clearer path to victory in Week 1. Their offensive depth just appears to be, a real strength, giving them the projected advantage in those key hitting counting stats and also in saves, while Kankakee's pitching quality is strong for sure and could definitely keep their ratios in their favor. I think the overall balance and projected volume from Go Birds, offensively, and now with, a decent pitching volume projection, gives them a slight edge on paper, and the predicted score reflects that. Go Birds 7, Kankakee Cremators 3, but that really does rely on those bench contributors living up to their projected roles.
Okay, let's move on to our second matchup. Long Ball John versus Baseballs. Look like rocks, just the name of that second team there.
I know, right?
Suggests we might see some dingers.
Yeah, the projections definitely hint at a slugfest here. I think both of these teams, look like they have the potential to really put up some big offensive numbers, especially in those power categories.
Yeah, let's dive into the hitting matchup first then. Are we expecting a barrage of home runs here?
The numbers certainly suggest we should brace ourselves, both Long Ball John and Baseballs. Like, rocks are projected to have nearly identical, really high numbers for both runs and home runs when you look at their full, projected rosters. But Baseballs look like rocks seem to gain a clear advantage in projected RBIs and have a significantly better, projected batting average sitting around .299 compared to Long Ball John's .286. And this seems to be driven by a lineup that's stacked with high average run producing hitters. Think about guys like William Contreras, Bryce Harper, Yordan Alvarez, Corey Seager, and then, consistent contributors like Marcus Semien and Seiya Suzuki, providing really valuable depth off the bench. So this suggests that, BLR's offensive approach might be geared towards getting more runners on base and driving them in very efficiently.
So Baseballs look like rocks, with the edge, driving in those runners and getting on base consistently. How does Long Ball John respond to that, though?
Well, Long Ball John brings a pretty decisive advantage in projected stolen bases. Yeah. They're led by Shohei Ohtani as a hitter, of course, along with Tommy Edman, Christian Yelich, and, even Jasson Dominguez, who has some intriguing speed potential. So they've got some real threats on the base paths there. And when it comes to power, Long Ball John's no slouch either. Matt Olson, Austin Riley Ohtani again, and Cody Bellinger form a pretty formidable power core. Both teams also have deep benches, that can add significant offensive potential. So while BLR might have the edge in average and RBIs, Long Ball John looks poised to steal more bags and can certainly match them in the home run department.
All right, so it sounds like, a trade-off here. Baseballs look like rocks batting average and RBI strength going up against Long Ball John's speed. And then those power numbers, kind of looking like they might be a wash.
Yeah, it's going to be close.
Okay, let's see how the pitching side of things looks in this, potentially high-scoring matchup here.
Right.
Will either team have a significant advantage on the mound?
Well, Baseballs look like rocks is projected to have significantly more overall pitching volume, and that's largely due to their starting rotation, with guys like Logan Webb, Pablo Lopez, Justin Steele, and potentially, Sandy Alcantara returning from injury. And then, they even have solid depth on the bench with arms like Carlos Rodon and Kevin Gausman. So that volume translates into clear advantages in projected wins and strikeouts. The more innings you pitch as a staff, the more opportunities you have to rack up those wins and strikeouts.
So they're going to be out there, they're going to be getting those innings, and therefore, racking up the chances for those wins and K on Mon. What does Long Ball John bring to the table pitching-wise, though?
Well, Long Ball John is projected to have, superior pitching quality overall. They're looking at a better projected ERA and WIP led by Dylan Cease, Framber Valdez, Bryce Miller, Bailey Ober, all guys, who are expected to be pretty efficient at preventing runs, limiting base runners. And they also have a projected edge in saves, primarily relying on Josh Hader and Trevor McGill, with Aroldis Chapman also in the mix, to potentially contribute there. So now that high, projected innings total for Sandy Alcantara, for BLLR, that's a key variable to watch here. If he doesn't pitch to that level because of workload management, or, if he has some early struggles, the gap in those wins and strikeouts could narrow significantly. And, BLLR's ratios might even improve a bit. So the pitching matchup here, presents a fascinating contrast.
Yeah, so we got baseballs look like rocks with the volume and the wins and the strikeouts versus Long Ball John's projected efficiency in ERA and WHE plus that save advantage. It seems like a real different ways to kind of build a pitching staff here.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so when we put it all together then, for Long Ball John versus baseballs look like rocks, what are we thinking here?
Well, it's a fascinating split. BLLR seem to be leveraging that hitting depth for batting average and RBIs, and then their pitching volume for wins and strikeouts. Long Ball John is countering with that elite speed for stolen bases and superior pitching efficiency in ERA and WIP, along with that save advantage. And with runs and home runs projected as a near wash, this one really does look like it could come down to the wire, daily lineup management and, how those key pitchers perform, especially Alcantara, for BLLR are going to be absolutely crucial. And the predicted score reflect that tight contest. Long Ball John, 5 baseballs look like rocks 5. This one could be decided by just a couple of categories.
Okay, going on to our third matchup, Joe Buck, yourself versus Scott's bullpen. I always appreciate a good punny fantasy team name. So what are the projections telling us about this one?
This one shapes up to be really competitive across the board. The projections suggest we're looking at 2 very well-rounded teams here, with Joe Buck, yourself, holding some very slight advantages in several categories. But Scott's bullpen has some serious power potential that could definitely swing things in their favor.
Okay, let's start with the hitting then. Are we expecting a high-scoring affair here, or, will the pitching kind of keep things in check?
Well, it's interesting. The offenses project as remarkably balanced when you consider the full roster potential of both teams. Joe Buck, yourself, is projected to have a slight lead in runs and a more solid advantage in batting average, around .301 compared to Scott's bullpen's .289. And that seems to be driven by the presence of some elite contact and on-base guys like Mookie Betts, Manny Machado, and the batting average specialist Luis Arias. And they even have some, solid bench support with players like Gabriel Moreno and Alec Burleson, who can contribute to that average as well. So JBY looks like they might be focused on getting more runners on base and scoring through a higher overall batting average.
So Joe Buck, yourself, with the edge in, getting on base and scoring a few more runs potentially. How does Scott's bullpen respond to that?
Well, Scott's bullpen counters with slightly more projected home runs thanks to, some real power threats in the middle of that lineup, like Aaron Judge and Pete Alonso, backed up by guys like Teoscar Hernandez and Anthony Santander, who can also go deep. And they also pull slightly ahead projected stolen bases with contributions from a dynamic speedster like Tree Turner, along with Andres Jimenez. And they even have some potential speed on the bench in Matt Shaw now when it comes to projected RBIs. The numbers have them as virtually, even so on the hitting side, it looks like a very close battle with slightly different approaches. JBY leaning a bit more on average and overall run production, and Scott's bullpen relying more on their power to generate those runs and their speed to, steal some bases.
Yeah, sounds like a real contrast in offensive approaches there. What about the pitching matchup, though, in this one? Will it be as closely contested as the hitting?
Well, this is where things get really tight. The pitching projections for Joe Buck, yourself, and Scott's bullpen are astonishingly close across all categories. Total projected innings, pitched, wins, strikeouts, saves, ERA, and WOP are all nearly identical. Joe Buck, yourself, holds the absolute slimmest of advantages in projected win strikeouts, saves, ERA, and WFP, suggesting a slightly higher overall quality, distributed across their pitching staff, which includes arms like Tarek Skubal, Chris Sale, Max Fried, and Emmanuel Clase. It really speaks to the balanced construction of both of these pitching staffs.
Wow, that is close. Does Scott's bullpen have the pitching depth, though, to keep pace in all of those categories?
Absolutely. They are loaded with quality on the mound, featuring guys like Zach Wheeler, Cole Reagans, Aaron Nola, Zach Gallen, all projected to be, frontline starters. And then they even have some potentially impactful arms, like Sonny Gray and Kodai Senga, who could be returning from injury and provide a boost off the bench. Although their health and, projected roles are definitely something to watch as the week unfolds. But yes, given those razor-thin margins in every single pitching category, this part of the matchup really looks like it could come down to individual pitcher performances on any given day.
So when we look at the overall picture then for Joe Buck yourself versus Scott's bullpen final assessment here for week 1, what are we thinking?
Well, Joe Buck yourself appears to have, very slight projected advantages in more categories overall, particularly on that pitching side, although, as we noted, those margins are incredibly narrow. Their projected edge and batting average on offense is probably, the most distinct advantage in the matchup. Scott's bullpen will likely need their power hitters to really deliver on those home run projections and for their speed to translate into stolen bases to, swing those categories in their favor. But given the overall parity, especially when it comes to pitching, Joe Buck yourself seems just a hair better position for a week 1 victory based on these projections. The predicted score, Joe Buck yourself 6, Scott's bullpen 4, but this one feels like it could easily go either way.
Okay, let's move on to our 4th matchup here. And this one has a, very direct, confident team name. Who's your Vladdy versus Out for Blood? Sounds like it could be a battle.
It does, and the projections definitely suggest a fascinating clash of strengths here. Out for Blood looks like they have a truly deep and explosive offense, potentially dominating those hitting categories, while Who's Your Vladdy's countering, with a pitching staff projected for some elite ratios and a significant number of saves, especially when you consider their overall pitching depth.
Okay, let's dive into that, a potentially dominant offense there for Out for Blood. What are the numbers telling us about their lineup?
Well, the projections really paint a picture of an overwhelming offensive force Out for Blood, fueled by an incredibly deep roster that includes stars like Bobby Witt Jr., Rafael Devers, and Corbin Carroll, and supplemented by high-impact players like Jarren Duran, Michael Harris II, Bo Bichette, and even Adolis Garcia coming off the bench, is projected to have significant advantages in runs, home runs, RBI, stolen bases, and even batting average. Their combination of power, speed, and contact looks almost unmatched in this particular matchup. It suggests a team built to score runs in a variety of ways.
That sounds like a really tough lineup to navigate for any pitching staff. So Who's Your Vladdy bring to the plate offensively to try to keep pace with that?
Well, Who's Your Vlad? Vladdy certainly has some potent offensive pieces themselves, with Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Jazz Chisholm Jr., and Oneil Cruz headlining their lineup, along with some promising young talents in Jackson Maryland, Colton Cowser, who could provide some upside. They also have some speed on the bench with Xavier Edwards and power potential in Brandon Lowe. However, when you compare their projected overall offensive output across those 5 categories, it just seems to lag significantly behind Out for Blood's juggernaut. They have some, impactful hitters, but the overall depth and, projected production really favors Out for Blood, quite heavily.
Yeah, so it really does look like Out for Blood has a pretty clear advantage on the hitting side of things. How does Who's Your Vladdy, try to claw back into this matchup and potentially, secure a win?
That's where their pitching staff comes into play in a big way. Who's Your Vladdy, after we factor in their projected bench arms like Jose Barrios, Justin Martinez, and Bowden Francis, is projected to have significantly more overall pitching volume in terms of innings pitched compared to Out for Blood, whose listed bench arms had 0 projected innings. And that difference in projected workload translates into projected advantages for Vladdy in both wins and strikeouts. If your pitchers are throwing more innings collectively, they'll have, more opportunities to accumulate those wins and strikeouts naturally. So more innings overall and therefore more wins and strikeouts potentially. What about the quality of their pitching, though? That's another area where Who's Your Vladdy is projected to excel their starting rotation, featuring Paul Skeens, Shota Imanaga, and Brian Wu, along with what looks like an elite closing duo of Edwin Diaz and Ryan Helsley, is projected for significantly better ERA and WAP. They're also projected for a massive advantage in saves out. For Blood has some quality starters in Michael King-Canterbigi and Freddie Peralta, but their lack of projected bench innings and some question marks surrounding their closer Devin Williams due to a potential injury situation leaves them trailing in volume saves and ratio projections against Vladdy's deeper and potentially more dominant pitching staff.
So it really is a strength versus strength matchup out for Blood's powerful and deep offense going up against Who's Your Vladdy's deep and dominant pitching staff.
Absolutely. The projections suggest a clean sweep for Out for Blood in all 5 hitting categories, while Who's Your Vladdy's pitching, especially with that projected bench depth, projects to dominate all 5 pitching categories, and based purely on those projections, it results in a perfect 5-5 split right down the middle, predicted score. Who's Your Vladdy, 5 Out for Blood 5.
Yeah.
This is definitely a matchup that will be fascinating to follow throughout the week to see, which strength ultimately prevails.
All right, finally, let's take a look at our 5th and final opening week matchup here. Trash Pandas versus John's Triple Threat. What is the projected outlook for this one?
This looks like another really interesting contest with, kind of a narrative around power versus overall balance and depth. Trash Pandas bring some serious, home run power potential and what are projected to be truly elite pitching ratios, but they might face some challenges when it comes to overall pitching volume because of some injuries. John's Triple Threat, on the other hand, seems to boast impressive offensive depth, particularly in speed and run production, and enough projected pitching volume to potentially offset those Pandas, efficiency and injury concerns.
Okay, let's start with the bats then, who's projected to have the more, productive offense.
Well, the projections give John's Triple Threat the edge in overall offensive depth and versatility. They're projected to lead in runs and stolen bases, fueled by stars like Jose Ramirez and Fernando Tatis Jr., along with consistent performers like Freddie Freeman and Ozzie Albies, and a pretty deep bench that includes Nico Horner, Cedric Mullins, and Josh Young, assuming he's healthy and contributing. They also project a slight advantage in RBIs, suggesting they might have more opportunities to drive in runners. Their offense looks built to generate runs through a combination of getting on base, moving runners around, and stealing bases.
So Triple Threat looking like they'll be scoring more runs, being more active on the base paths. What do the Trash Pandas bring to the table offensively to counter that?
Well, the Trash Pandas are projected to counter primarily with superior, raw home run power. They got some big boppers in their lineup, including Jake Burger Kittel, Marte Juan Soto, Brent Rooker, Tristan Casas, with even more power waiting on the bench in Rayce Hoskins and Paul Goldschmidt. Of course, the injury of Ronald Acuna Jr., is a significant blow to their overall offensive outlook and, likely impacts their stolen base projection as well. But that remaining power in their lineup is still formidable and could lead to some big offensive outbursts. Interestingly, when we look at projected batting average, projections have both teams hitting around .290, suggesting similar levels of quality contact. So offensively, it really looks like, kind of clash between Triple Threat's ability to, generate runs and steals versus the Trash Pandas' potential to hit, more home runs.
Yeah, sounds like a classic power versus speed matchup there on offense. What about the pitching side of things for these two teams, though?
Well, this is where we see a pretty significant disparity in projected workload. John's Triple Threat, with a full stable of starting pitchers, including Corbin Burns, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Zach Eflin, and Brandon Pfaadt, is projected to have substantially more innings. Pitched around 94 compared to the Trash Pandas' projected 74. And that difference in projected volume naturally leads to, clear projected advantages for Triple Threat in both wins and strikeouts. If your pitchers are throwing, significantly more innings, they're going to have more opportunities to rack up those counting stats.
Yeah, and what is the situation with the Trash Pandas pitching staff that leads to, that lower projected volume?
They've unfortunately been hit by some key injuries, heading into the season. George Kirby is listed as day-to-day with 0 projected innings for the week, which suggests, he might not be ready to go. And Shane McClanahan is on the injured list, so he's out for the foreseeable future. And that puts a lot of pressure on, potentially limited innings from returning ace Jacob deGrom, along with Tyler Glasnow, Ryan Pepiot, and their key relievers, John Duran and Ryan Presley. So while this smaller group of Trash Pandas pitchers is projected for, truly elite ERA and WAP, and even a slight projected edge in headlining, saves that lack of projected innings makes it very difficult for them to compete with Triple Threat in wins and strikeouts. Triple Threat's ratios are projected to be, solid, if not spectacular, making their volume advantage in those counting stats look, pretty decisive.
So that pitching volume difference seems like, a major factor here that could sway this matchup.
It really does. When we look at the overall projection for Trash Pandas versus John's Triple Threat, Triple Threat appears to be in a better position due to that combination of offensive balance and significant pitching volume. They are projected to win in those key categories of runs, RBIs, stolen bases wins, strikeouts. Trash Pandas are likely to win in home runs.
saves ERA and WHIP. However, that significant discrepancy in projected pitching volume is likely to give John's triple threat the overall edge needed to secure the weekly victory. Despite the Trash Panda's projected pitching efficiency, the predicted score, John's triple threat 6, Trash Panda's 4.
Well, there you have it, a comprehensive deep dive into your 5 opening week matchups in the Wrench Turning Trainwrecks League. We saw some fascinating contrasts in team construction and projected strengths, from depth versus top-end talent on offense to pitching volume versus efficiency, and we even highlighted, that potential impact of those early season injuries. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's been really interesting to see those recurring themes across the matchups. Several teams are clearly banking on offensive depth to generate that consistent production, while others are hoping their star hitters can really carry the load. And on the pitching side, the strategic choices are also apparent. Some teams prioritizing, high strikeout, high save potential, even if it means, slightly higher ratios, while others are really focused on run prevention and limiting base runners. And as we've seen, those early injuries can really, throw a wrench into even the most carefully planned rosters.
Absolutely. So as you take a look at these projections now for your opening week matchups, what stands out most to you? Are there any potential surprises, lurking beneath the surface of these numbers? Which matchups seem destined for, that tight finish that could really come down to the wire? And where might we see, some unexpected dominance, in a particular category or even an entire matchup?
Well, I think the long ball John versus baseball's look like rocks matchup, with that perfect 5-5 projected split really jumps out as one that could be decided by just a few, key player performances or even a lucky bounce, and the Hoosier Vladdy versus Alfred Blood clash. With that very clear division between projected offensive dominance and pitching dominance is certainly one where a slight overperformance or underperformance in one of those areas could completely flip the expected outcome. It really highlights the inherent volatility of head-to-head category leagues.
Now consider this. How closely do you think the actual week 1 results will align with these initial projections? What are the biggest wild cards out there? Maybe an unexpected breakout performance from a rookie, an injury, we didn't see coming, or just the inherent randomness of baseball that could completely upend these, seemingly well-reasoned predictions as the season officially gets underway tomorrow, this opening week, provides just a snapshot, a set of educated guesses based on the information we have right now. The true story of the Wrench Turning Trainwrecks League in 2025 is just beginning to be written, and we'll be here to break down all the twists and turns as the season unfolds. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and good luck with your opening week matchups.
Good luck.